It's July of 2025, and recently the Helix Stadium was announced for release in the fall of this year. So what better time than to reflect on the current generation of modelers and how we're using them? I know for me, my main rig is a 65 Princeton reissue with my pedal board running into it, but over the last couple of years, I've found myself using this HX Stomp more and more for things like demos, or sessions or gigs that won't accommodate the Princeton, or moments where I need to be silent, like playing when our son is sleeping. Now, I expected to have to learn how to get the most out of the HX Stomp in order to get sounds that were comparable to what I was already getting from the Princeton, but I didn't expect that process to teach me so much about tone in general. So here are a few lessons that I want to pass on to you. What's your main sound? What's a sound that you use more than any other sound, and what are the ingredients that you use to get it? For me, it's a dynamic sort of edge of breakup thing that employs the Promise Overdrive by Millstone Audio into the Princeton, set relatively clean with a neutral EQ and a little bit of reverb, out of its 10-inch speaker, mic'd with an SM57, about 1.5 inches off the grill, right at the cap edge. For me to recreate this sound in the Stomp, I ended up having to split off the amp head part of the Princess amp from its 10-inch speaker, and placing the spring reverb and the tremolo circuit in between the amp and the cab. It's closer to where it would be in the actual amp. It means that I have one less block to play with in the Stomp, but for me, it's worth it. The thing with modelers is that you can get a bunch of sounds really fast, and so it can be tempting to drag everything you think you're going to need into the signal path right away, and then try to dial it all in kind of one fell swoop or in one sitting. That's doable, but you might find that getting the core of the sound right first means that adding anything additional later ends up sounding a whole lot better and makes the process of dialing things in a whole lot more enjoyable. And this is true whether you're using a modeler or a more physical rig. Interface of most modelers and the way it just kind of looks invites a kind of minuscule sort of tweaking. And if you've ever really gotten into the weeds with something like that, you might have had the experience of incrementally making yourself sound worse instead of better, and then kind of waking up after a session of trying to dial things in, wondering what happened to your tone. In that space, it can be a little bit more intuitive for the end product to start with way more sweeping moves than the UI might invite, and then getting yourself into a ballpark of how you want to sound before you start to fine-tune things. It reminds me of how most people are going to approach dialing in a Fender amp. I see way more people see what the treble, for example, sounds like on 5 and then 4 and then 6, rather than starting on 5 and then going 5.1, 5.2, 5.3. It lets us dial in these amps faster and usually leaves us without that kind of whiplash feeling of focusing on decimal points for what seems like an eternity. While you're dialing things in, try using at least a whole number value, if not more, to get yourself into that ballpark a little quicker. And while you're doing it, you might get some use out of this chart that the user Bar Records on the Fractal Audio forum made. It does some clever math that attempts to reconcile the difference between the number values of a modeler that's going to go from 0 to 10 in its controls and an amp that, like on a Fender amp, is going to go from 1 to 10. It might not seem like it's going to make a huge difference, but I found it helps a ton. It's no surprise that the HX Stomp can't do every single sound that my pedal board and amp can do. But instead of that reality leaving me feeling limited, it's actually led me to question whether I need so many sounds for any given situation in the first place. Less sounds means less time spent dialing things in and potentially more time spent growing in skill and comfort with the sounds that we do have. So for my main HX Stomp preset, I ended up having to settle on a couple of levels of the same flavor of gain, a couple of options for modulation, and then 3 snapshots with no delay and reverb, some delay and reverb, and then a bunch of delay and reverb. That might not seem like a lot of choices, but I've used this single preset for entire sessions more than once without any problems. No matter how many sounds we have, we're always going to benefit from investing in how we're attacking our instrument, where our controls are set, and where we're voicing our parts. Tone is the result of every variable in the equation, but it's cheaper to invest in our playing than it is to buy a whole new overdrive. Just like a speaker affects the sound of everything going into an amp, the sound of a room is going to affect the sound of all the sounds made within it, and it smooths out differences more than we might realize. A lot of us have had the experience of listening to a rig in a room and then trying to record that rig, feeling surprised at the difference between what we think we're hearing in the room and what's coming out of the recording. Now, the process of dialing in a modeler is kind of a weird, curious inverse of that process, where we're trying to get the sound in this little box to translate in the room in which we're playing. Sometimes that involves thinking like a producer or thinking like a recording engineer, and other times it involves having candid conversations with someone like a front of house tech. But either way, the main issue is one of perspective and application. Instead of seeing the stark, like really immediate surgical quality of modelers as a discouragement, let's use the control over the details that we do have to our advantage and consider just letting go of the elements that aren't in our hands to begin with. Dialing in just the right tone to fit a particular musical situation is a noble and valuable endeavor. But if you're anything like me, it can be easy to forget to ask yourself whether you actually like the sound that you're hearing, especially when you're trying to match sounds across different pieces of gear. Ultimately, if you love your tone, it's really likely that the audience will too. Inversely, if you don't like the sound that you're hearing, I don't think there's going to be someone that can complement it that's going to change your mind. The range of sounds in most modelers should remind you that there's a ton of equally valid ways to make a guitar sound. There are common choices, but also notable exceptions for guitar tone in every style and genre. So don't be afraid to follow your personal tastes. Like any software, Learning to use the modeler that you have to the full extent of its capabilities is always going to be time well spent. So I'd encourage you to get your hands dirty as much as possible. But in that process, if you are looking for a shortcut, or you like the sounds that you've been hearing in the clips in this video, or you like to see the ways that other people are building presets, I invite you to follow the link to my website where I have some presets available. Right now, we've still got a free version of the Princeton preset, but soon that's going to be replaced with the Jack and Jealous pack, 3 different amps and a little bit more that I use to make Jack and Jealous's music. Feel invited to check out Jealous's tunes while you're there, and in any case, I'd love to hear the lessons that you've learned using modelers or about tone in general in a comment. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching.